Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Deep Thoughts. This is another special report regarding a original series show on Netflix called Stranger Things. This may not hit an hour. I don't know. This will be full of spoilers. But before we get to the spoiler content, let me give you sort of the setup for this show. And the reason why I'm covering this show is that I've had a number of listeners mention that I should see it, comment on it. They have concerns about it. And so we're going to go through pretty much what the show's about, what I like about it, and address some of the concerns I've had brought up to me. Because I'm sure that if one person's willing to say something, a lot of people having the same feeling, or at least more than one. But this is about a district in Indiana, the state of America, called Indiana, Hawkins, Indiana, I believe, which I'm sure is a fictional location. This is the setup. This is in the first episode, but if you're not going to watch the first episode, then you should hear this much. Locally, there is a Department of Energy military base next to this beautiful little country town, which is full of every interesting person you could ever want to meet, from the sheriff to the nuclear family to the completely broken family. A mother raising two sons by herself, one with the daughter, the boy and the daughter. The sheriff is sort of a drunk who gets the job done. Very endearing character. And he's not really a drunk, but he's just your renegade maverick kind of guy. Extremely well played by this actor. But we start to see an experiment going on in what appears to be the basement hallways of what is labeled as the Department of Energy, which you soon realize is obviously not the Department of Energy. In the description of the series, they will reveal to you that this is some sort of extension from the clandestine project MK Ultra. MK standing for Mind Control and abbreviated Deutsch/German. A little girl appears to have some abilities, and she eventually uses those abilities to escape captivity, wanders around the woods until she is discovered by three little boys who have recently lost a best friend to some random event, which they are unaware of. Town is sort of looking for this kid, but they bring home this little girl who looks like a little boy. When you see it in Netflix, you'll swear to God you're looking at a little boy. It's just because they've shaved her head. And they hide her. And the government comes looking for her. The boy's missing is related to the experiments going on in this facility. There are teenage heartthrob story arcs. There are 4 nerdy kids / 3 nerdy kids who are just living an amazing life. And the whole thing is kicked off by being set in 1982. And I will tell you why they said it in 1982. But that's your setup. The rest is going to be spoiler, because we're going to go deeper and deeper into what the series is all about. For those of you who have just finished Stranger Things, I'm a late bloomer to this. I wouldn't have seen it had two things not occurred. This is what's kind of synchronous for me. Again, at least 2 viewers wanted to know my opinion about this show. One of them is a concerned parent, which I can't even tell you. I get goosebumps when I have concerned parents care about this stuff, because it just makes me think that we didn't lose the essence of goodness out of this society. I know there's millions of concerned parents out there, but this is very specifically about the content in this show. But the second thing that happened was that I went to a late night herfing of cigars with the friends of mine. Probably started around 10:15 at night. And I go to the back patio where we're smoking behind my buddy's place, and they have Stranger Things probably 15 minutes into the first episode playing, and we sat and watched as 3 grown men between the ages of 44 and 50 watching this program 5 episodes in a row. And we're all looking at each other at the end of every episode, and we're going, this is good. This is really good, right? I'm not just falling into this thing. As older guys, it's or I don't mean guys and males, but older folks, 45 and up, I would say, you're watching the show from one level just to dissect all of their homages to the era of 1982. You'll hear songs that you swear were released after 1982, and you look them up on whatever, the internet, and you'll find out they were released 2 years before you realized it. Really phenomenal. For some of them, it just took a while for them to make the video to penetrate America. But that's not terribly important at this point. We'll get to some of those fun things in a second here. The show, which I just finished last night, is 8 episodes long, season 1. It is directed and written initially by the Duffy brothers, whom I have absolutely no knowledge about whatsoever. Never heard of these guys, but hats off to them, man. Hats off to them. What you need to know if you haven't watched it at all, and you're still watching this, I mean, I would say this: if you don't think you're ever going to watch it, then keep watching this. And you might find out that you really want to watch it. And I guarantee you I will not reveal, or could I possibly reveal, every outcome of every event in the series. There's really no need for me to do that unless it makes a point. I'm not here to spoil your viewing of this. But what they've done, the Duffy brothers have, considering that they've given themselves writing credits for this, I'm going to use their name. And again, they get the A for the day, people. In some areas, I think they get an A+ for the day, because they've been able to shoot a piece that J.J. Abrams has been trying to shoot his whole life and has never once come close to what these guys did in their television series on Netflix. But they set this whole thing back in 1982 for a very specific reason. And it's the reason why I set my first film back in 1979. Because today, we've allowed our Constitution to be so utterly violated that you can't have certain story arcs, you can't have certain unknowns, because everything is surveyed. Right? Every communication has got surveillance. You can always make a phone call because you have a cell phone. There's never any constraints on the characters. They can always do whatever they want constantly, and the government can continue to push in. So to move it back is to get rid of the tech of today. It's not just to make because they actually had to spend a ton more money setting it 1982, because they have to come up with props and cars they have to rent and clothing they have to salvage from somewhere and posters they need to hang on the walls and telephones and everything. It's all got to be pushed back in time. But they do a brilliant job pulling this off, man. I want to say that the casting is just as good as it gets, really. Especially for something that's probably not a tremendous budget on this thing. The casting is phenomenal. The kid actors, the children actors, which are essentially 5 really young kids and then probably 4 teenagers, or maybe 5 teenagers, excuse me. The little ones are the ones that I give, I'm more astonished by, because it's hard to get young kids that know how to act. I mean, really, really own their roles and make you feel the endearing nature of the original script. And the 4 boys that kick off this story playing Dungeons & Dragons in the basement of this one kid's house, it's a little overacted in terms of what Dungeons & Dragons was really played like, because these kids are such great thespians. They're doing stuff that none of us really did. We were a little more monotone when we were kids playing that game, but still, it's good fun. There's no flaws if I say something that's it's different than actually what happened. It's just a observation, right? The girl who plays the character 11, or L, is, I don't know, maybe she's 11 in real life, but she is 11 going on 40, and she's a 40-year-old who has experienced, and she's an old soul if there ever was an old soul. In this series, she has performances that I would say this much, lesser performances have given people gold statues in Hollywood. So if this kid doesn't get an Emmy for this particular role, then the system is completely rigged. Which it is. She is phenomenal. Her face is so engaging and so believable. And the stuff that she has to be afraid of, and the stuff that she has to deal with, and the torment of her character in this weird government program would bring an adult to their knees, and she's doing it as an 11-year-old or something, somewhere in that age bracket, right? And hell, if I know she's 30 years old, but she looks like a really young girl. The teenagers, there's 5 of them. One of them is the brother of the child, Will, who ends up disappearing at the beginning of the series because he is chased down by this monster from the other side of this dimension that's opened up in the story. There's a couple teenagers that are the super duper overacted teenagers. You kind of have to have that as a contrast to great acting and great balanced acting, back to basic character portrayal. Personally, I find it a little annoying that when overacting ever occurs, because I feel like it's the role of the director to sort of say, well, let's try to achieve the same end goal by not doing this. But it works. It really works. But let's get to some of the concerns, because I don't want to mess around just telling you the whole story. The concern is that this is essentially content that I would definitely say that a child should not see this show for a number of reasons. And what I mean by child, I would say, it would need to be someone who's, I hate to say it, but I would say either an extremely mature 16-year-old and up, with a parent to sit there with them and say, this is what you're seeing, this is the part that's BS, this is the part that's real. Because it's, they hearken to MK Ultra. And, I did a whole episode on MK Ultra through the Kathy O'Brien experiments. And, what's interesting about it is that the government has tried to demonize, and this is just a tiny little caveat to this and digression, but it's in the script. The government loves demonizing LSD because it's such a mind-expanding drug. And it really is the drug that would bring the entire world out of war and into peace. Now, if there's a huge surge of LSD creation all of a sudden after me saying that, I would say make sure it's real LSD, because you might just be taking something different that will give you horrible experiences. And they'll say, see, look, it's LSD. It's bad. But the real stuff isn't bad at all. There was a lot of government experiments giving people LSD and watching their reactions, and a lot of it's videotaped. But MK Ultra, as I mentioned in the episode 101 of this season 2, it's anything but a little weekend joyride on LSD. It's torture, it's mind control, and probably a hell of a lot more stuff that it would be unpublished, unspeakable stuff. Now, this particular series mentions MK Ultra, I think, for perhaps a couple reasons. And because I've been accused of stupid shit on this show, this, I'll tell you what, when you were a kid and you're on the playground, depending on what kind of playground you grew up on, you'll have a kid run up to you and do the old-fashioned, I hit you and I run away, or I call you a name and I run the other direction, right? It's a cowardly thing to do. It's just to be a dick, really, right? And so when I get someone who goes, yeah, you're a fucking shill, and unsub, my tear ducts are very dry after that moment, just so you know. And the whole shilly thing, it's like, yes, there are shills, but Christ almighty, it's like, before you call me a shill, one, go watch my episode on shills, and two, listen to all my episodes and tell me how I'm this destructive force in the fucking world, right? I'm not going to really feed into comments much, but the reason why I say that is that I don't want to call these directors or these Duffy brothers, I don't want to implicate them in what I think might be occurring. You never know how much of the script they wrote and how someone might have inserted something, and it may just be a coincidence because they have taken from every single awesome, scary movie that has a poltergeist Spielberg feel, and they pulled it into their script, and I'm gonna mention them as we go along here. But just because they picked out MK Ultra, maybe there's a big psyop going on inside this show, and maybe it's just an alluring thing, because the one thing they didn't do was really get into what MK Ultra did. They are more on the they need a cover story for this horrible experiment that they did at this place. and a cover project, which it's in the script. It is supposed to be an extension of the MK Ultra project up till 82, which would mean that type of research went on for a really long time. But the way that the first episode debuts is that this is a renegade laboratory that had a mistake. They opened up a portal. This is in the first episode. They opened up a portal and shit came out. This weird creature came out from what they end up calling the underside. Then the group comes in to take over the problem, just like in E.T. And I mean, it's just a pure homage to E.T., where this guy comes in and takes over the laboratory, and then somehow the girl gets introduced into the problem. And she, you'll find out later on, is kidnapped through what they claim to be a miscarriage. And what's funny is I wrote that exact arc in 1989 in one of my books. Government stealing basically babies from mothers, saying they were stillborn or whatever. The major thrust of this particular implementation of MK Ultra is something that some of you know quite well, which is called remote viewing. For the uninitiated, remote viewing is about the concept of sort of understanding that the universe is a big giant consciousness, and that merely concentrating allows you to take your consciousness and move it to a different part of the universe and look. But if you don't think you can, you never try. And if you never try, you never know. And so what the Central Intelligence Agency did was essentially what a lot of us conspiracy folks, or truthers I should say, not everything is a conspiracy that we look up. The conspiracy would be that we have not been told the truth, not that we've been lied to. That's half of the conspiracies that exist out there. But remote viewing, there's tons of books on it, there's tons of courses on it, there's people that have done it. And in the intelligence agency, in terms of the full disclosure attempts at this remote viewing, it was essentially that we wanted to view the Ruskies, and it's portrayed in this show brilliantly. They wanted to look at essentially the plans or the conversations or the worlds of the Ruskies in their intelligence, war rooms and the bunkers down below, all that stuff, right? And this little girl who was kidnapped and conditioned, who at first I thought she was an alien because she didn't know anything about, simple words like friend and promise, and she's just sort of a mute because they kept her in the dark and fed her bullshit, right? But she has this telekinetic power set, and it's a total ripoff / homage to Firestarter, written by Stephen King. And what I love about this movie is that they actually mention the movies that they are stealing from. And I have to say, it makes it okay. When Coldplay ripped off Kraftwerk for their very first song, their first big hit, which was, I believe, Kraftwerk's Computer Love. And then one of the band members is quoted as saying, when asked, why didn't you credit Kraftwerk? When you stole their melody, you stole their song. And he said, why should we have to give credit to a dumb German techno band? Like a bolt of lightning should have split that guy in two if he said that. But I wasn't there. But, I don't know why someone would write that about him. But the beautiful thing about the Duffy Brothers is they're, other than calling out the Twilight Zone, and I hope that they've seen all the Twilight Zones because they ripped off the original Twilight Zone quite readily. See, Poltergeist is ripped off from a Twilight Zone where a little girl, and it's ripped off so efficiently, it's crazy. And the Duffy Brothers, I'm sure, have seen it because when the girl disappears, when the little boy disappears, Winona Ryder plays his mother, who, I think she overacts a lot in this thing, but I love her to death. I wish her the best of luck, and I hope that she continues to make it happen. But it's really hard. Like, there's very few lines that she delivers that I think are balanced with everyone else's performance. But, gotta blow the smoke blow the cobs out of the pipes, right? But she ends up talking to her son inside of a cabinet in the front room. And that's exactly the location where the Twilight Zone with the little girl disappears. Her mother talks to her in a cabinet in the front room. So just so you know, that's where that comes from. Now, using the lights to communicate was utterly brilliant in the episode. I'm going to be jumping around quite a bit, so you have to finish the entire series to understand what I'm saying. But Winona Ryder's character coming up with the binary yes-no technique, writing the alphabet on the wall so he could construct sentences. I mean, just great screenwriting, because the idea is you want your characters to do what you would do and for it to work. Because it's sort of the writers saying, see, you were right. You wanted something to happen, and see, we did it, and see, that made the script better, so your imagination is on target too. That's sort of what that scene did for me personally, and I'm sure most of you had the same thing. But now the Twilight Zone, where Poltergeist came from, was a little girl that went to bed at night. She's tucked into bed, and then her parents hear her calling the mother's name, I believe. And they go into the bedroom, and she's not on her bed. So they look under the bed, which is up really, really high, and she's not there either. But they can still hear her voice, just like in Poltergeist. Now, we're talking like Twilight Zone, where it was originally taken from, was released almost 20 years before Poltergeist came out, to the year. But what they did in the Twilight Zone was that the wall had turned into a portal, and she had rolled off of her bed and then crawled forward and went through this wall. Is essentially the backstory behind the whole thing. But, you know, in the Poltergeist, it was Mary Ann was the girl's voice, and she would yell mommy in this really reversed, phased voice technique. They were extremely brilliant with the way they did it. And Stranger Things, I think that it felt more like Nightmare on Elm Street with the telephone calls, and the weird breathing on the phone calls. And then, of course, in order to put the phone call through, a lot of electricity is coming through the phone, which eventually fries the telephones. I thought that was great. The little sound effects on all the lights everywhere in the entire series is utterly brilliant. Every time a light does a little on-off sequence, which is the Poltergeist theory way before Poltergeist the film. See, because Poltergeist takes the portal idea from Twilight Zone and makes it a poltergeist, and brings in ghosts and brings in all kinds of stuff, whereas in Twilight Zone, it's just the girl's lost in an alternate universe, and they have to get her out before the door shuts. So it's just been a brilliant evolution of the whole story. And Stranger Things does a brilliant job of taking Poltergeist to the next level. So you're really in for a treat, in my opinion, watching this series. Now, I'm just going to say before I forget, I hope, and I don't think this is going to be the case, I really wish they would make Stranger Things sort of an episodical Twilight Zone, where there's eight episodes to a particular storyline, and then in the season 2 they restart a different storyline and go 8 episodes and restart 8 episodes, and just make these really nice, long, beautiful, mysterious, cool shows, because then they could take it way in the past, way in the future, make it present, stay in 1982, because I think that they've milked all the arcs of this particular town, and I think it'll be a little silly if they try to take the same characters through another storyline. But they've opened it up for a sequel using the same characters. But, as much as you love those characters, trust me, just like Black Mirror proved to everyone, there are people that want Twilight Zones to come back. They like that mysterious kind of film school twist at the end, which we haven't seen in quite a while. But so in this particular episode of the MK Ultra thing, there's some folks that are concerned about MK Ultra being mentioned at all. And I want to say, I think it's great. If MK Ultra being spoken in an episode provokes the curiosity of a viewer to really look up MK Ultra, think about what happens. Where do you go to look up anything in the world? You're going to go to Google, which we're pretty convinced is the government, right? You're going to go to YouTube. You're going to find, hopefully, a Kathy O'Brien video. You're going to find a personal website that's referring to those videos. Hell, maybe you find, my episode 101. My stuff is hardly the best piece of authority, but I'll get you put in the right direction at least, right? So what would be better? Never knowing MK Ultra existed, or knowing it existed? I'm going to lean more on the side of, I'd rather have folks know what our government did with a bunch of Nazis smuggled into this country through Operation Paperclip, led by Yale University graduates who belong to something called Skull and Bones. What people don't understand is that, especially those that do not believe that, Lee Harvey Oswald shot, or people that believe he shot JFK, is that we have this conversion of America. And you can really track this really, really well through Michael Rupert's research on the CIA. But you're talking about an organization that was formed out of the alumni graduates of Yale University and essentially the members of Skull and Bones, which is all the Bush sons, Bush Sr., Bush grandfather, John Kerry's family, are Skull and Bones. All these guys work together. And they were the Central Intelligence Agency, but it was a very small group in the 40s and 50s, and had some other name right before it started calling itself the CIA. But they served the bankers of Europe. That was their charter when that organization was created, I believe in 1834. They said, we are here to take over America by all financial means necessary. And that's exactly what they did, using the 16th Amendment as the coup de grace hit, which is turning on income taxes illegally. Actually legally, but everyone thinks they have to pay it on their wages. And it's in our Constitution that unless it's flat tax, we don't have to pay, unless we volunteer to pay, unless you're a corporation or you're selling firearms or tobacco. I'm not telling you to break the law. I'm telling you that's what the law is. Go watch Aaron Rousseau's video, Freedom to Fascism, right here on YouTube. Okay. But the transformation of control really occurred right around 59-60. And the transformation, and this just happened to be the height of the MKUltra project. And it sort of fizzled out pretty much in the early 70s, as far as I know from my research, in that they had really gained all the knowledge that they needed. They were also getting exposed a little bit, but I think they didn't give a shit at one point. They could have killed everybody who was causing them any problems, but I think they just kind of peeled off and went, yeah, we got our Manchurian Candidate thing figured out. We've got a lot of stuff figured out. And we've spun off other projects you know nothing about that are hidden in bunkers, and you'll never know anything. We're splicing spiders and humans together. But the transformation of the CIA, just from my research, is that they needed infinite cash to come from somewhere that wouldn't be in a ledger, that was already in circulation. And so drugs and selling firearms became the number one way to create liquid cash for this organization. But the the Italian mafia had complete control, meaning majority control, over the sale of cocaine especially. And they were just starting to get back into some opium/heroin derivatives. And so the CIA spent basically 49 to 59 doing surveillance on all of the Italian mafia. They gave the dossier to RFK, Robert F. Kennedy, to shut down all these big mob bosses and be a hero. And of course, he thinks he's doing it for his country. He thinks this is a legitimate thing, not realizing that the second they took out all these mafia heads, or at least got them underneath their umbrella of control, that the drugs were still going to be sold. In fact, they were going to be sold more intensely than ever, but all of the profit was going to go into this shadow organization to make them have, by 2001, they were able, this is Berkeley University professors studying the average profit of selling cocaine and heroin in America based on State Department levels of consumption. So using the metrics gathered by our government, which are probably less than what's actually being consumed, it's about a $4 trillion a year industry globally that our intelligence agency controls. And Michael Rupert, again, has all the paperwork and shows it in his movie on 9/11 he shot in 2001 November in Oregon University, where he brings up essentially all the paperwork to take them to court and expose them. And he talks about how C-130s have been stolen from the Forest Commission and used to import, purified cocaine, purified heroin out of Turkey and Colombia. I'm mentioning this because it's important when you talk about the MKUltra project and its longevity and its purpose. But in the 60s, the first drug dropped on Americans was LSD, because it was going to be a non-destructive drug that was going to have everyone have a good time, and they were going to make a ton of money off of it. And it turned out to be easy to create, so they lost control of manufacturing, and it opened people's minds and made us against war. So it became the most demonized drug, even though it's the safest thing you can take between heroin and cocaine. And now heroin and cocaine barely have any time. If you get caught with a bag of it or whatever, a ball of it, you're not going to go to jail for that long. If even anything, they'll smack you on your hand and say, keep buying because we have to fund our intelligence agencies, right? That's why Club 54 blew up in New York in the 70s, to glamorize cocaine among the extremely rich. And then you wanted to get cocaine if you were a lowly person, because then you were going to roll as hard as Charlie Sheen, right? When they realized it was extremely addictive, they cut it down to crack cocaine to make sure that everybody in the ghetto could buy it and screw up their lives entirely. Heroin took till about the late 80s to really take off, and that's when Robert Downey Jr. was slipped a heroin cigarette, and he ended up chasing the dragon for about 15 years, as he admits himself. So this agency used the drug industry to make their cash, and in the 60s, it was about the cleanup of anyone that was going to oppose them. JFK murdered. Martin Luther King murdered. RFK murdered. Malcolm X murdered. The guy that runs against Nixon in the second term, shot in the spine, just like Larry Flint. You mess with these dudes, you died. If you try to stop Vietnam War, you get impeached and kicked out of the White House. At that point, they realized, Nixon taught the intelligence agencies, we don't want people that actually think that they're president, running for president and getting into office. So they put Jimmy Carter in second. A really non-confrontational, peaceful guy that will do what he's told. But he immediately tries to land in Area 51, and they tell him he's not going to be allowed. Who comes in next? Well, they put George Herbert Walker Bush in as really the president, putting a nice Hollywood guy, Ronald Reagan, in front. When Ronald Reagan tries to figure out that, what's going on in the government, they do a little fake assassination attempt to make sure he understands who's running the show. And then that guy probably lived in hell the rest of his life until he died. Dying of Alzheimer's, of course. From that point forward, it's all been controlled. George Herbert Walker Bush gets his 4 years. Clinton, who'd been running the Mena, Arkansas drug trade out of Arkansas, comes in. Easy peasy. George Jr. comes in. Easy peasy. Guy doesn't even want to be president, but he's there the whole time. And Obama, give me a break. So that's how we are. That's why we are where we are today. So highlighting MK Ultra, for me, it gives you a thread in the sweater if you're an adult. Could be the Duffy brothers are just trying to give you the thread. Who knows, right? But I don't think it goes that deep. It sanitizes the entire thing into a very small compartment and makes you believe that it's a tiny laboratory, and it's so fantasy-oriented it doesn't really touch base. But here's where I get concerned. I've mentioned this once before, I think a long time ago, but it goes like this. What if evil is something that you'd never seen before, and then you see it? How do you feel? You feel like it sticks out like a sore thumb, and it's an extremely noticeable thing. So now, if evil is shown to you constantly, then it sort of seems okay. It just does. Imagine a beheading video going out on national television in the United States of America in 1955, 1 year before Elvis Presley brings in crazy rock and roll. Can you imagine the uproar in this country if a beheading video was shown back in that day? If it gets shown today, I can tell you maybe a third of the nation would be appalled, but 2/3 of the nation's going, oh yeah, that's like the 10th one I've seen. So let me tell you, as a writer in LA, and I've confirmed this with lots of my writing buddies, the idea is you can't really create a villain anymore, because what could you possibly create on paper that is going to rival the villains that you see in real life? Can I really make a bad guy that scares you more than if you believed in ISIS or Al-Qaeda? Could I make something more scary than that? Nah. I can't, because that one's real in your mind, right? And it doesn't matter if you know that ISIS was created by Hillary Clinton and the State Department, along with Obama watching the entire time. If you know that just makes you more angry and more concerned that this is real. Like it doesn't take away that they exist. It just takes away the backstory. So it's very difficult to create a threat in a script of any kind. And the other kind of fail-safe is that, oh, well, we got computer graphics now, and we'll just make another, robot come after you or another monster come after you. And this show has to rely on a monster to freak you out. And I'm going to say they've come up with one 3D model of a monster in this particular episode, in this particular show, I should say, and it's pretty remedial. It's stealing from a bunch of stuff you've seen all over the place, including like Diablo from Blizzard Entertainment. But it's sort of all you need. They've sort of made all you needed to be afraid and be interested. And it's really these endearing freaking characters and how the dialogue's written and how it's performed that makes you come back for more. It's sort of like Walking Dead. You don't watch Walking Dead for zombies. In fact, really, about after season 3, if you never saw a zombie again the entire show and it just turned into a post-apocalyptic human-on-human thing, you're fine. The cliffhanger that just happened earlier this year for Walking Dead, and if the new one's out, I've never seen it yet, but it's not a zombie problem we're dealing with at the cliffhanger of the last season that just aired in 2016, early spring. It's a human-on-human problem. But my concern is that if I say to you, okay, I've got this really touching story about a girl who is kidnapped into a government mind control program, and she is being manipulated on all kinds of levels. And sort of my narrative is that it's half of it looks like they're for her and protecting her, and the other half is that they're absolutely torturing her on levels that is, really inconceivably bad, right? If that's the case, then I have worn you down. If you watch it, I have worn you down from child mutilation, child torture. Because the more that you can watch Stranger Things and the girl being tortured mentally, because she's put in a deprivation tank at one point, which is a homage to Altered States. And as soon as she blacks out in this deprivation tank, she's automatically in the underside, and she's seeing this beautifully shot. I mean, the director of photography, the DP, in this series is just fantastic. The only thing I wish they would do is a few more long shots to establish sets and hang on to them for 5 seconds, because they won't let any shot go for more than 2 seconds, which is sort of the short attention span of today. But it's still beautifully done. But there's just gorgeous shots of the Midwest in this freaking show. But also the fantasy world is beautifully done. The special effects are beautifully done. The set design is beautifully done. But this girl is, approached by this beast. She has to approach it. And it's horrifying. It's brilliantly done. It's not the scariest thing you've ever seen in your life, but if you're a parent of a child and you felt the empathy of your child being terrified, it doesn't matter what's scaring your child. You don't want your flesh and blood to tremble. And so, I took my daughter on her first ride, and I didn't realize I was going to take her on, I took her on Pirates of the Caribbean. I think she was about 7. And I had forgotten, for some reason, that there are 2 drops that are absolutely in the dark, because the way that the ride's constructed, they have to go underneath the train tracks that are coming overhead, and so they have to make the ride go down, so that they get underneath what's above. And we're coming up to the first drop, and I've got my girlfriend to the right of my daughter, and she's in the middle, and she is clamping down on our hands. And my kid never cries, And I could feel her shaking. And then she said, before we were about to go down, she says, "Why do they make scary rides?" Her little mind constructed that sentence, and I thought, wow, what an amazing observation from a child. Why do we make scary rides? And obviously the answer is once we feel the rush of adrenaline in the system, and dopamine that's spun negative, and then we come out of it, we realize that we're safe, like I talked about in the motorcycle analogy in the last episode. The idea is we thrive off of it, right? It's why the elite of the world drink children's blood. Go see the Satan episode if you have any questions about that. But, as soon as my daughter came out of the hole and it was bright and she got to see all these pirates and stuff and see just the wondrous world of Pirates of the Caribbean here at Disneyland, Anaheim, she wanted to ride it immediately again because it felt good. So we were sitting in our living room watching this horror. We love, if you're into horror movies, horror shows, scary stuff, you get off on it in your living room. Hell, you can watch it on your telephone anywhere you are in the world, right? It's amazing. So that's why we're addicted to it. But the real danger is that there's a bunch of human trafficking going on in this world, which has always been going on. It's just we're starting to get some retired Navy SEALs and Delta Force guys going in and capturing these kids and bringing them home. They're just taking a tiny slice of the overall pie of this going on, but we're starting to become hip that that's a really bad thing, and it's happening all over the place. So this show, sort of just trying to tell a good story, is desensitizing us against that thing. The other thing is what we call misdirection. Now, remote viewing is something that the government absolutely did, and they admitted it. And it doesn't, they don't, I don't know if they've ever opened up a dimension to demonic stuff. Those of you who are concerned about CERN have definitely beliefs about the fact that they have or could have. Who knows? Again, I don't see an army of darkness crawling across this planet, and I would imagine that the second orifice to some dark universe were open, that would commence fairly quickly. Just watch, what is it? Well, hell, the cutscenes to StarCraft 2 from Blizzard, as well as Diablo. You'll see what it looks like when the Zerg, pop through and start tearing up our universe. It's pretty terrifying, and they've done a brilliant job, probably the most brilliant job of an invasion fictional storyline, right? So if there is a danger to this show, I think that's pretty much it. But again, I think highlighting the idea that MKUltra exists and you go and research the real project, this show is doing us a service in mentioning this in a mass media situation. And think about it. How many shows have you ever seen in your lifetime that talk about MKUltra? I think X-Files at one point has talked about it, but not much. They're more about UFOs, Area 51, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, all this stuff. Which, again, it has its value. But it's also pumping up the myth that our government has a bunch of alien technology, right? And by the way, I meant to mention, I've created some playlists on YouTube now that will help some of the newcomers come in and see the videos that are really linked to each other. If you want to see my take on alien technology, there's an episode called Do Aliens Exist? And that's where I go through the basics of what has been claimed to be technology that we got from aliens. And I dispel it because being a technologist myself and a scientist on my own right, it seems like the things that they itemize as being alien technology seem to be very logical developments in technology, not anything major. And we were right there in the pocket when we discovered, fiber optics, silicon chips, and Velcro, But the other arc that's in the story that's valuable, I think, is that you can't trust covert government projects. Now, what they did was they walk a fine line in the series to say the government is actually on our side to a certain point, and, they only kill if they need to. But there's a scene in the first episode where one of the Irish guys from the Nick, who drives the paddy wagon in the series The Nick, which is based in 1900, he actually is sort of a cafe owner, cook. It's his place, a little truck stop. And the little girl happens to wander in his kitchen and starts eating his food, and he's taking care of her. I would have loved to have seen that guy continue acting in the series because he's a great actor, and he just would have added some great genetics to the show, in my opinion. But he gets shot very quickly by this MKUltra team that came in to take over the problem that was going on in the in this laboratory that's marked as the Energy Department, or Department of Energy. Now, I want to say that if you dig Stranger Things, I want you to watch a series for me, and it's called Torchwood, and I want you to start with season 3. I will warn you, it's a BBC spinoff of it's written by Russell Davies, and it's a spinoff of Doctor Who. And it's about an organization that is essentially the Men in Black organization in London that lives underneath this very famous park in London. And they're underneath. Now, the warning I want to say for some of you guys, we seem to struggle. Let me just be real forward here with you guys. We seem to struggle with viewers that are very opposed to, I guess, the gay and lesbian lifestyle. Every once in a while I get a comment that's, if I say anything remotely tolerant of the gay and lesbian community, I get someone who goes, oh, you support fags, and unsubbed, and they just, this profound thing that they leave. Okay, so Torchwood and the BBC pump the equality of at least the gay community. There's two guys. There's a guy who's the lead actor of this Torchwood, who, you would see him and you'd think he was straight, but in real life he's bi, and they take advantage of that, and they make him have a relationship with the guy in the Torchwood group. And it's just, if you're a straight guy, you see two guys making out, it's a hard one to watch. It's just nature. It's just nature. That's all. It's no disapproval or homophobia or whatever. It just is. It's tough to watch. So this has a couple makeout scenes with two guys as their relationship reaches a level. It's not just exhibitionism. It's built into the story. But the reason to watch Torchwood Season 3 is that, for my money, it is one of the best. It's right there with Stranger Things. It's one of the best scripts, I think, ever written for television. One of the best. I'm not saying it's the best, but Stranger Things goes right up there in my top 3 favorite television, made-for-television scripts. But Torchwood Season 3 is about an alien race that contacts mankind and says, essentially, we're coming. And the way that they do it is, for me, it's brilliant. And I do not believe they've been ripped off to the extent that it would seem less than amazing to you right now. But for me, it's just a brilliant series. Enough said. But in Stranger Things, you're sort of torn at times, even though they shoot this guy and they kill him in his cafe to capture the girl, and then she uses her powers to continue to be free. You don't know if this is if they're killing this guy because they have to, because if they don't kill this guy, then the government gets exposed for creating this portal, which is really more of a legal liability thing. Who's going to get sued if CERN brings in the devil, and the devil runs havoc all over the world? If we're unable to stop such a force, then there's no legal liability. It's not going to court. So this is why some folks are militant about stopping covert programs from existing. But unless your scorecard reads a lot different than mine, they're winning. They can do whatever the hell they want. Once they push bases underground, and you can't get access to it, they could do anything in their imagination, in their spectrum of thought, and we can't do anything about it. Or we could, but we'd have to have someone on the inside give a shit about humanity and stop it. But as long as you feed that person bullshit and keep them in the dark, they don't think anything's happening. It's one of these fine lines of, if we were to say as a society we don't want anything secret to occur in the world, we want to forbid secret societies and secret this, secret that, then it's, well, how do you have any privacy in your life? Do we draw the line and say, okay, well, you and your wife are in that room, and hey, we've analyzed everything in the room, and there's no torture devices, there's no guns, there's no, so you can't kill your spouse in this room, so I guess you get to be alone. Oh, wait, you can strangle her to death. It would be tough to say that we couldn't have a private moment to ourselves. But maybe it is on the sovereign human being level, where you ask two human beings, by saying that you're married on a piece of paper or you're willing to live together, that you're willing to consent to your time together without supervision. This sounds crazy, right? But you say government agencies aren't able to live in total secrecy. Well, then they bring up military defense and they say, well, we have to be able to develop weapons to fight our enemies and do it covertly. And then we can randomly select something that's embarrassing to us and say it's a matter of national security, which is a hip formula that they've known for thousands of years. People have been telling the citizens, when your government starts claiming that things are a matter of national security, that's when corruption festers uncontrollably in society. And we've seen this happen, right? So anytime I see a cop worship show or some sort of X-Files type of show where they are reinforcing the need for secrecy and making it an arc for the viewer that we also endorse their need for secrecy, then we are being brainwashed into helping secret societies exist to our demise. You know, a lot of people worry about nuclear bombs and nuclear holocausts and that kind of thing. Well, all of that was made possible through, you know, the Manhattan Project and whatever the Russians called it and whatever other countries called it. And now it's the situation where, you know, all first world countries that have nukes are blessed and they're okay. It's okay for them to have it, but if any one of their enemies goes and researches it, well, they're bad people. And obviously, if you know anything about Sharia law and you think about them having nukes, well, that seems pretty scary, doesn't it? So let's talk about, just briefly, some of the homages to other shows on TV and other movies that have been made. Mostly movies, I guess. The bleeding nose thing, again, I haven't read every single book. I haven't seen every single movie. So for me, the bleeding nose as a result of using powers came from Stephen King's book, Firestarter, which was made into a movie with Drew Barrymore. It was also repeated in Carnival when Ben Hawkins, the character Ben Hawkins, would use his powers. He would have blue blood fall out of his nose. So it's an old arc, and it's, I think, it gets tiring in Stranger Things. But if you've never seen it before, it probably is the most amazing thing you've ever seen. The being hidden in another dimension obviously starts out, for my money, in the Twilight Zone. It probably was a short story someplace else, because a lot of Twilight Zones are based off short stories. And then it was reprised in Poltergeist 3 times, and then it was put into this show. In Poltergeist, and even in the first show, the way they in the Twilight Zone, they rescued the girl by her father reaching through the portal wall and grabbing his daughter when the dog went into the hole and brought the daughter back to the hole. And his buddy, who's this physicist, was grabbing onto his waist, and they pulled him back through the wall. In Poltergeist, they realized they needed another mechanism, and they did the rope around, I believe, the mother, who goes in. They're throwing the tennis balls in to make sure that they're coming out the portal that's in the ceiling of the family room downstairs. And the mother goes in with the rope attached to her. They fall out of the ceiling. The father grabs them. They're all covered in packing gel, like meat gel, and they go into a bathtub and wake everybody up. It's one of the most endearing scenes in the world when that little girl looks at her daddy and goes, "Daddy?" It's phenomenal. In this particular show, they used a steel winch with steel cable, and they put a scientist into this orifice, and then the guy gets munched, and the cable comes back. If any of you have ever seen the movie The Keep, which is a total sleeper made in the 80s, fantastic film about hiding the devil inside of a big building, big castle called The Keep, protected by a bunch of probably Jesuit priests. There's a very amazing scene when the Nazis find the place and start disassembling it, and they want to steal like nickel crosses out of the wall. And when they do that, they start releasing the demonic energy. There's a Nazi that crawls into the hole, and you just see him, like, head first. His feet are sticking out, and he starts getting eaten on the other side, and someone pulls the lower half of his body back out of the hole. Sort of like the scene with the winch, right? Like I said, I think everyone should see Altered States. It's a William Hurt movie made in 1981. It's about deprivation tanks, taking ayahuasca, LSD, all kinds of stuff, and having these incredible out-of-body experiences in order to find the original truth within the genetics of mankind. There seems to be a lot of formula from E.T., little kids riding bikes through these wilderness areas. I was really waiting for the little girl to use her telekinesis to make the bikes fly away. Never happened. but it just has this beautiful feel. What the Duffy brothers and the director of photography were able to do is really recreate that look and feel that J.J. Abrams tried to bring back in his movie Super 8. For my money, Super 8 was the most miscast movie probably made in the last 10 years or 15 years or however old that movie is. The kid actors, I think, were atrocious. People disagree with me, but my God, it just seemed to be really, really pushed. If you want to see great Stand By Me, Goonies, Poltergeist acting, you go see Stranger Things. These kids just do a fabulous job. We're trying to find everything in the series to see if everything checks out with the era. And my buddies and I think we figured out one thing that we didn't think existed back in that time, but I think some of the terminology wasn't used back in those days. I don't remember douchebag being a really intense saying. There's one place in the script where they say sucking face, and that term was not in the vernacular of man until a movie came out called On Golden Pond with Henry Fonda, one of his last movies he ever made, and they talked about sucking face. It was a big thing in the script. So I'm sure kids were using it at the time, but in the mainstream kids that I hung out with, it wasn't until that movie came out that we all started saying it. It was great. The chief of police mentions the NSA at one point as if that was a common phrase. The NSA absolutely existed in that time frame, but, I don't think we were really hip to all that stuff, and I don't think a chief of police of a rural town in Hawkins, Indiana would be having that on the tip of his tongue unless he had a military background they were unaware of, which would have been a nice backstory for that guy. There's for those of you who love X-Files, there's a definite X-File feel to it, except the actors can act and they have emotions. But the sort of wilderness exploration stuff was extremely well done. Now, the other thing that those of you who are probably 45 and over might remember if you lived in the United States was that, like I said just a few episodes back, a lot of the folktale stories of the 70s and 80s, early 80s, were around phone call, scary movie, arcs where it was like, I forgot, was it Nightmare on Elm Street or something? But, the phone would ring, and the big scary arc was that someone's in your house. They're making the phone call from within your house somehow, which is impossible to do, of course, without a second line. But the phone is a big mechanism in this particular series, and a lot of us who are older remember rotary phones, and just these old phones that were stuck to walls. You couldn't make cell phone calls, and again, if this show had cell phones, it would completely screw up the versatility of the show. So I would be really interested to hear young kids comment on it who've never been without cell phones and hear their feelings about what it's like to see a show without cell phones. And the fact that you had to be at home to make a phone call. At the most, it was a payphone. And I can definitely tell you that payphones have never really been, in my lifetime, the go-to thing. Like, you didn't just go downtown and go, oh, I need to make a phone call to my mom. Let's just get on a payphone and make the phone call. But payphones were sort of a weird, dirty thing. If you had a lifetime around payphones, then we lived a completely different life from each other. But like my hometown, there was a couple payphones in the entire town of 10,000 people, and it was essentially a desperate mechanism to make a phone call. You weren't allowed to essentially make phone calls at businesses. They didn't really open that up, even though the way that the billing worked back in that day was that if you called within the same prefix, which is the same town, my little hometown was 431, you didn't get paid. You didn't get charged for that. You just paid a flat fee for infinite phone calls to your house. And it's the second that you dialed outside of your prefix, outside of your area code especially, you started getting dinged incredible rates of money. I mean, the amount that they, Ma Bell was essentially printing money back in the day, because you're talking about a nearly free service once you hook up the lines, and I'm sure they paid for their lines within a few split seconds of turning on the surface. One thing that they did brilliant in the series is aging the world. A lot of times when you see period pieces like Back to the Future, for instance, all of the cars in Back to the Future are brand new 40 coats of lacquer cars. And it works. perfectly for Back to the Future. But for this one, they created a dirty town with old cars and, broken down cars. Nothing was brand new in this series, and it just was done brilliantly, in my opinion. So hats off to production design and whoever takes care of the car purchasing for this particular show. So overall, I think the series is definitely worth watching. I'm willing to bet you'll enjoy it a lot more if you're, again, around 40 or over, simply because the era of 1982 will be something that you remember. I think that you will appreciate a lot of the hard work that went into portraying this era. I think that you'll appreciate the fact that it has a feel and a look that is extremely accurate to the era of filmmaking at that time. It's one thing to say, oh, we're going to make it look like it's an 80s film. It's another thing to write it like an 80s film and to cast it like an 80s film. I think the imagery systems are dangerous unless you're educated. If you're watching me, then you probably are well aware of what those issues might be. But again, I just want to heighten in your mind, anytime you're seeing horrific imagery, that it's wearing you down of that horrific imagery being horrific. And so we don't want to lose our ability to identify what's wrong in the world. We don't want child abductions and child torture and covert government programs to ever be something that we kind of go, well, that's just the way it is, and that just has to be that way. We can say that's the way it is, and we need to change it. This is a fictional story. It is so outside the realm of what's probably going on in the world that we don't need to really worry about these specific story arcs in particular. But it's just something to be aware of. And again, I think if you have small children in the house, you'll want to be careful. This is way beyond, I think, Poltergeist. And like I said a long time ago, when I saw Poltergeist, it was my father coming to grab me after school, grab my best friend and I, took us to the, I think it was Brockton, Massachusetts. He took us to the movie theater in some little strip mall there, and he dropped us off and said, I will come back and get you. I've already seen this afternoon. And it was great, there's a guy pulling his face apart. There's monsters in hallways. There's all kinds of stuff. So maybe I'm being a little overprotective about where kids are today. I don't know. My kid is not a child anymore, so I don't know. I don't know what would freak her out. I think that as a child, my kid would have nightmares probably up until maybe the age of 15 if she saw this. She was a very mature child. One thing I definitely realized, for those of you who are interested in writing, I noticed something in the first episode. There's a son of Winona Ryder, the older son, looks like a young Axl Rose. He gets to a point where he has to cry and sob with his mother, Winona, who I think, again, she has a really tough role in this. She has to be absolutely panicked in this script for probably 3 shows, and she's sort of crying and moaning and yelling, and it's sort of one of these annoying arcs, but it also helps you appreciate everyone who's stable, and there's a writing technique to that, so she's doing what she was hired to do. But there's a point where her son is also in this sobbing state of mind. There's one scene where the actor blocks himself really badly, and he goes over to comfort his mother, and they continued the shot from his back, sort of blocking all of the action, so all of the dialogue's off camera because you can't see their faces, and there's a lot going on when he's doing this. But there's something that I realized, just for, again, you guys that are writing for screen, I now think that it's an extremely risky thing to put 2 actors in one scene essentially competing for the credit of crying the best. Because the boy, you can tell, probably isn't a big crier in real life, and so he is trying to push himself to a point where he probably hasn't spent much of his life in real life sobbing and crying. Winona is sort of taking it, I think, just slightly too far in her reaction, but who knows? Who knows what it would be like in real life? And again, I think she has probably the level 10 role in the whole series for having to establish the fact that she's a panicking mother from her son leaving. But when the 2 are together, trying to sob together, I don't think they quite pull it off. It just seems weird. And it only seems weird because of the science of two actors trying to accomplish a crying state at the same exact time. It's very interesting. It's just a tiny part of the first episode. But it's just interesting. It's sort of a learning experience for everyone. And again, I would give everyone a huge thumbs up in their portrayal of their characters completely. So I won't do a lot of these, but I'm not here to review my favorite shows with you guys. I mentioned movies, I mentioned television shows as they apply to the subject matter we're talking about. This particular one did hit on MK Ultra, which I think was a subject we've obviously covered on a show that's centered on mkultraradio.com. But I just wanted to hopefully put some fine points on what I think that the script is accomplishing in our minds. And again, misdirection, I think, is probably, one of the byproducts of mentioning MK Ultra with this fictional, super fictional X-Files type portrayal. But it's just so light, and there's no real on-point misdirection that I feel like the writers were just trying to write a great, scary series. And I think we can probably rest okay. And again, if we're adults and we can see it, it's okay. Hey, just don't let your 12-year-old see it. Unless they're a super horror flick, 12-year-old, where they're like, oh man, I watch Saw once a week. But I think that it behooves us as parents, as parental guardians, as adults, to educate the kids on what they're seeing in a way that you don't annoy them while they watch the series. Maybe wait till it's over and then you say, well, you remember when they said this? Well, that's really what this is, and that kind of stuff. But at the same time, we don't, for clandestine projects that are off, that are long gone, restitution's been paid in, 7% of the cases. It's really what is here and now that's most important. And there's plenty that's here and now. Before I sign off, let me just go on this little tangent here, because I feel like this is something I've never quite said in black and white, and I think I want to do that right now, which is the following. If you're a parent, there's this weird sort of mezzanine that you have with your child between the world that they're living, which you can simply observe their face and their daily dialogue to understand where they are in life. And then you see, if you're a truther, and you see all the revised history, the revised science, all the disinformation that's going into your child's mind. You remember, they're forcing children to see Al Gore's horrible, horrible movie, An Inconvenient Truth. I watched the Olympics the other day because I was at a smoke shop, and why a bunch of men were watching the Olympics is beyond me. I didn't think men watched Olympics, but it was the opening ceremonies in Brazil. And what do? They break out of the opening ceremonies to run this bullshit global warming thing. And they start recreating all of the flood maps that were in Al Gore's movie Inconvenient Truth. And just to make sure we all understand here, Al Gore, after hosting the propaganda movie Inconvenient Truth, where he showed a bunch of flood maps of the world and how we're all going to be underwater, bought a beachfront property in Montecito, California that was supposed to be underwater in his own movie. You'll see Montecito, California swallowed up in water. Now, for those of you who don't live in Southern California, this has been one of the coolest summers we have had in 15 years. The hottest summer we last remember was in 2003, when it was this particular day, 13 years ago. It was over 100 degrees for days and days and days. And that's when the sun had a lot of sunspots, which creates coronal mass ejections, where they're not, it's up 3,200 miles or 93 million miles away. Those things control our heat. And that's why we had a bunch of heat spikes in 2003. Has nothing to do with CO2 in the atmosphere, which barely exists at 0.054% of 100%. So they ran all this, again, scare tactic stuff, basically usurping the Olympics and stealing the eyeballs of the Olympics to push this propaganda again. Unbelievable, right? So what I want to talk about just real quickly is, as a parent, there's a point when you believe that your child needs to hear the truth versus the lies that they hear from the educational system or from the internets, right? So it's a really super tough one, and there is no black and white rule because your child's maturity is different than someone else's child's maturity. I have mentored prodigy kids who can hear it, and they don't care. They really want the truth more than anything, because a child is typically brought up in an environment, regardless of how tortured they might be, that if they're being abused mentally or physically, they know more than anyone that the truth is what they really, really want. They want out of this world where they're being abused. But for a normal child, which I assume are your kids, there's just a point when they're mature enough to hear it, but probably not the whole thing, right? They don't need to hear about ISIS when they're 16 years old. They just won't get it unless they're bringing ISIS to you and saying, what the hell is this, mom, dad, whatever, right? So when we let our kids watch things like Stranger Things, again, it's pretty light. I think you're pretty safe with that. It's just a fictional thing. But there'll be a point when you need to guard your children from even hearing the sound in the house. If your child's upstairs and you're so sure they're asleep, but there's like devil sounds coming out of your TV, you got to be super careful. Super duper careful. Try to watch that crap on an iPad, some tablet, a computer, where the sound barely gets 6 feet away from your computer or your device, such that your kid's not hearing the thunderous booms of devil footsteps, horrible breathing, because this show does a brilliant job with sound design as well. By the way, the band called Survive, which is doing a major homage to Daft Punk's soundtrack of Tron 2. If you watch the Tron 2 soundtrack, or listen to the Tron 2 soundtrack, and then you listen to the opening credit soundtrack, it's as if they lifted about 80% of Daft Punk's soundtrack and made it their own. But it's brilliant. I mean, it's really well done. I do think that they overdosed a little bit on 80s music at points when there should have been a lot of tension on the screen. They're playing sort of goofy 80s music because someone said, well, we got to play this song. We licensed it. I think it goes without saying, but we need to proceed with massive caution, because the moment that, well, just think about your own journey. When you started figuring out the world was full of a bunch of lies, it's not exactly the most uplifting experience. Now, eventually, hopefully, you do get to a point where you are sleeping better because you know the truth, not sleeping better because you're terrified of the truth. Again, if you've ever been a truther and you've ever brought information to people that they didn't want to hear, but they asked you, you don't want to just shovel the stuff out at parties because you'll be the most unpopular person on planet Earth. I never bring up this stuff unless someone is really pushing hard on me. And I tell them, like I've said in previous episodes, I'll tell people nowadays, you don't really want to know that information, or you need to prove to me that you're not trying to get me to tell you that what you already believe is true. You need to tell me that you're willing, that it doesn't smell right to you, it doesn't feel right to you, and so you want that to make sense to you. You're not sleeping well because of what you've observed, and you want to sleep better. The analogy I constantly use, and I would suggest that you repeat this if you understand it, which is that I grew up in Kansas, and in western Kansas, there's a city called Dodge City. And Dodge City is notorious. There's like Deadwood, Dodge City, and Tombstone, which are in the history books for being one of the roughest 3 towns in the early settlement days of the late 1800s to live in. And the reason is that, there was a bunch of rough and tough guys, and who knows how much of it's true, But Dodge City for me is a reference that I make constantly to explain to people. I say, look, the real truth to the world is that it is a Dodge City at the capstone of the pyramid, meaning the controlling forces of this world don't live in the most peaceful environment that you might assume they live in. Even if they have the mansions and the palaces and they own little islands and stuff, maybe in those quarantine areas you will have some of that bliss for them, but they live in terror of being taken out, of losing control, which is why they're trying to depopulate the world and lie to us, right? Once you accept the world as sort of a wild, wild west at the controlling apparatus level, it makes, for me personally, it makes going to bed at night a lot more comforting, And I will tell you that the thing I get every once in a while from a friend. I just want to put a fine point on it for those of you who may be having the same thought either about yourself or about me or the people that are way more deep than me, like an Alex Jones or David Icke or various folks. They'll every once in a while I get the question, aren't you concerned that they're going to come get you? You know, my first response is, what am I putting out there that's remotely, Julian Assange level stuff or Snowden stuff? I mean, I tell you how they spy on you. I tell you that I believe the moon missions were fake as I was told so by NASA scientists. But I'm not deep. I mean, I'm deep in analyzing things, but I'm not bringing out anything that's stopping them. And I think that's the trick. If you bring out information that stops them cold in their tracks, then they're going to start paying attention to you and eliminating you, right? All of these people murdered by the Clintons this year is just phenomenal, right? Every single whistleblower on the Democratic National Convention has been assassinated, killed, blamed on robberies, blamed on suicides or whatever. Those are the people that are concerned because they're trying to stop the fraudulent election. Nobody reporting on it's going to get hurt. I mean, I'm just a drop in the bucket. But now what I want to highlight for you is that you had the thought to begin with. If you've ever had the thought, we say the world's screwed up all the time. And the idea that we believe that in the freest country on planet Earth, America, which is an idea more than anything, I might do an episode called America the Idea, because I believe it has to do with the idea of being sovereign, the idea of a republic, not a Republican Party, but a republic where you actually have sovereign rights simply because you exist, right? The do no harm mantra of common law. If you fear your government coming and getting you in the middle of the night, in a lot of countries you do disappear. Countries that we don't think people disappear, they disappear. The Philippines, boy, I didn't know, but they flat get rid of folks that dissent against the government. They just come pick you up in the middle of the night. Rule by fear is the doctrine prior to Magna Carta in Europe, and it was the doctrine that soon rebirthed itself after Magna Carta was signed. That's why you have to become a truther. That's why we have to resonate up the BS, to stand out like a sore thumb, not be worn down such that we accept it all. Know that they're playing the chess game on the opposite side of the chessboard. Now, we have the 99.9% population on this side of the chessboard that simply wants to wake up, live our lives, not be messed with, and go to bed and restart it the next day, to raise great kids, to really enrich society, to explode art and culture and science, to perhaps figure out whether or not we're on a dome petri dish or in a dome petri dish, or if we're in a heliocentric ball and we want to travel the stars. But on the other side of the chessboard, you have just a microscopic amount of people compared to the overall world population, whatever that number is. There's a microscopic number of people on the other side of the chessboard who live for short-term gains, basically money and power, and they'll do anything to keep it because they are atheists, plain and simple. And I'm not saying any one man-made religion is the way to go, but they do not believe in an afterlife at all. Or they believe Satan is their spiritual compass, and it's there's no suffrage on the other, suffering on the other side. Just do whatever the hell you want, get out, get your paycheck, and that's it. Which is why I think a lot of story arcs in Hollywood and television and in pop culture, pop science especially, tries to push you into that realm. To say, fear nothing, it's all just random particles making things happen. And obviously we don't want that world. We don't want a religiously fanatical world as well. We want a spiritual world. I think we need to acknowledge our glandular systems as essentially the gateway to the universe. That's what we need. That's what we want. So anyway, this has been a sort of loose interpretation of what I think to be a great show on TV. If you're an adult, I would definitely say you're in for a good ride. If you're over 40, you're going to have an extra good ride because you're going to see the old world that you grew up in pretty damn well portrayed. Again, I think the casting is fantastic. The directing is fantastic. The photography is fantastic. I think that it is a is definitely a rehash of all the old stories, but we haven't seen those in a long time. If you've ever felt like, man, why didn't they make an Altered States 2? Why didn't they make a Poltergeist 4? Or all the other shows that you loved as a kid, this is it. Stranger Things is a great reprisal of all those old story arcs, and they just did a great job. So thumbs up to those guys. I think out of a I don't know. I kind of don't like a 5-star rating because there's not enough granularity in a 5-star rating. I gave it 5 stars on Netflix. If it was a 10 rating, I would say you have to pull it back just shy of a 10 because it is an homage and it is a reprisal of other people's ideas. I think the execution's a 10. I think the originality is probably an 8, but regardless, it's worth your watch. But now you sort of have some of my thoughts about it. Anyway, if you made it this far, thanks for listening. You're a heck of a trooper. If you dig the episode, please like it. If you dig the series, please thumbs it up. Thumbs it up. Is that right? Thumb it up? Probably thumb it up, not plural on that. Thumb is singular though, right? There's only one thumb that you can thumb up, right? If you're new to this whole thing, this series is about, 3 main categories with a slight fourth, which is screenwriting, which is one of my passions. So there's only 3 episodes of that stuff. But it's really going to be under 3 categories: creativity, social sciences, and science. Those are the 3 main categories that all of the shows fall under, and just know that they're completely different from each other in some cases. They're covering coast-to-coast AM sort of topics like aliens, and it's covering quite a bit about sort of exploring the self, making yourself the most amazing person you can possibly be. The theory on this show, which I've only started articulating in the last maybe 5 episodes, is that our goal is to rebuild the bottom of the pyramid, because if you slice the top off of the pyramid or kill the head of the snake, this particular snake will grow back another head. And that's not going to work. If I gave you the magical power to wave a wand and get rid of everyone that runs the world, it will not change anything. We have to change the very fabric of the sweater, the very fabric of society, and that's you. And if you're watching me, I just have my opinions, right? Don't get all bent out of shape because I don't agree with you. And again, what I said in my very first maiden voyage, episode 1, was the following. If I simply provoke you to disagree with me, then what I have done is I have affirmed your own beliefs. Whether or not they're right or wrong, it's of value to you, in my opinion, right? So, hope this formula is working for you. If you haven't been already, go to mkultraradio.com. From there, you can get the Deep Thoughts links for video. If you're on audio, you can get audio if you're on video. It's on iTunes. You can just link straight to the podcast from the website, and you'll have the show in whatever format appeals to you. Just know that if you're coming through audio, there are a lot of pictures with some of the episodes. I've only probably have, I think, 4 episodes with strong picture content. But I'll usually tell you in the episode that I'm going to show something, and if you want to see it, you just go to YouTube and take a look. If you do subscribe, you will get notifications that these things exist. Podcast readers are pretty variant on that. Usually you have to touch them to get the notification that something new's happened. If you're a podcast addict, including that product on the Android, then you'll know how to do it. Anyway, thanks for listening. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.